this has become really relevant. Now, I thought that it would be quite useful for us to actually look back and talk about the origins of fake news and talk about kind of how we started off on this process. I thought that would be quite interesting to start. So, when I was a kid, this was kind of what fake news was. Pretty easy to identify. Some of my favourite headlines here, and now we knew that these were rubbish, and we knew that this was, and I would argue that a few years ago we never really thought about fake news. There was lies, damned lies, statistics, propaganda. We kind of didn't really give much thought to it, but of course the explosion of the world of social media and digital environment has meant that it is so much easier to spread fake news. When I was a kid, and the Sunday Sport was obviously not that much of a kid, because this is 1989. The Sunday Sport, I had to spend a long time looking for a front cover that was appropriate to use in these circumstances as well, as you can imagine. There were some very scantily clad teenagers on most of the front covers. So I had to go for Bus Found Buried at South Pole, which was actually a doctored cover there because Lindsay up in the corner there doesn't have her clothes on in most of these images. So I had to cover it up with Lindsay's face. I'm not sure if that is Lindsay, because frankly, in a lineup, her face wouldn't help you recognise it. So, but this was what fake news was, and this was the kind of world that we were in. And it felt safe because you could walk past the newspaper stand and you could go, lie, 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 propaganda. It was just easier in those days. But now, it's very difficult for us to know what we have and what we haven't. Now, I mean, it's not news, it's not brand spanking new. Our perception of it is new, but obviously ever since that someone has been telling a report of something, the power of that has lies with the victor. So history is full of fake news. It just depends on the perspective of it. But the news that we're seeing now has quite a different background from, Byzantine emperors rewriting their own personal histories and damning other people around them. So it all actually stems back to yellow journalism. And yellow journalism was prevalent in America we have the Americans to thank for many things, no offence to any American people here. The 1890s, yellow journalism came out, and it was called yellow journalism because it started off with people like Pulitzer, somewhat embarrassingly, and Randolph Hearst. They used cheap paper and cheap inks, and they had a yellow tinge to them. And shortly after they were printed, it literally took 2 or 3 days for the paper to yellow, which was why they were called yellow journalism. And it was defined by these key points. So we had scare headlines in large print, and you can see that there's a lot of this is actually what's in our newspapers now, even though this was defined and slammed in the 1890s. And you can see this lovely picture from 1910, which is copyright Library of Congress. William Randolph Hearst is a jester handing out newspapers, spreading this fake news, spreading these wonderful stories. And there were scare headlines in very big print, concentrating on very minor stories. So they would take a big news story of the day, give it a little tweak, and then push it out as a big story. Lavish use of pictures and visual imagery, lots of drawings, early use of photographs, making sure that they had this very visual impact. Pitching for lower level literacy, so pitching for people who didn't want to read great long contents, that they would actually read very small contents. Fake interviews, misleading, pseudoscience, false so-called experts. All they had to do was get someone and stick doctor on the front of their name, whether they were a doctor or not, and people would believe it. Emphasis on full-colour supplements, usually with comic strips, and apparent sympathy with the underdog. Now, this was defined in around 1900. This list of characteristics actually comes from around 1900. And you can see that pretty much would describe just about every newspaper you'd pick up today. And I think it's very interesting that some, in particular, which I won't name in the interest of trying to avoid bias, but you could probably guess, the emphasis on full-colour supplements and things like that, the extras that they were giving with papers, with these yellow pressed papers, to draw people in. And people were suckered by it. Elections, even at this stage, were influenced. People lost office, people lost power and influence and jobs entirely based on what people like Hearst decided other people and the buying public should think of them. So you can see how these steps became what we see today. Now, fake news today has actually been redefined based on the yellow journalism ideals. And Claire Wardle of First Draft News wrote a brilliant breakdown of what actually classes as fake news, because what we see as fake news might not actually be fake news. It might just be something with a heavy bias. It might be something that is more along the lines of propaganda and not actually fake. As Alice and I was saying earlier, there is a big difference between fact and lie, and truth lies somewhere in the middle there. So if we look at what defines fake news today, it is satire or parody, which has no intention to harm. It may well harm, but its intention wasn't necessarily to harm, but has the potential to fool. So it is the emphasis that it is going to trick you. So we see newspapers, we see mainly websites and things like The Onion, and we see Private Eye quite often will have something satire. Not necessarily, it's designed in the hope that you are intelligent enough to see the gag. That's what satire and parody works best on. False connection, when headlines and visuals and captions don't support the content. We've all seen those articles where you click on something and the content is completely different. I have to say that recently one of the people I've noticed the very worst for doing this, or the very best depending on your point of view, is the BBC. There are masses and masses of articles that come out with a headline that actually isn't the same. And I started off thinking that maybe it was just a punctuation issue, which is another thing that gets me. But I think that's actually a deliberate false connection designed to make you engage in the story more than you normally would. Misleading content, obviously we have an awful lot. That seems to be one of the predominant ones, is that we have misleading content. Directly false content, complete and outright lies. And this is one of the problems that we're having increasingly, is that there are direct lies, like complete and utter falsehoods. Imposter content, genuine sources that are falsified in order to get you to look at them. What we see with this is we see websites that will have, say, a .co added after the address. So we see bbc.com.co. So on the surface, the URL looks to us as if it is a correct site, but it's actually a complete set of imposter content. Manipulated content. This is described as genuine information or imagery is manipulated to deceive, as with a doctored photo. The example that I could think of that was very good recently was a couple of weeks ago. There was a photo doing the rounds that was a woman apparently flipping the bird to Jeremy Corbyn, showing him the middle finger. And that was an entirely doctored photograph, but that was tweeted out by Tory party publicity people and some of their digital content people. It was shared out, and it was entirely falsified. The woman, in fact, was going, "Yeah, good on," and they inserted a finger in it. Now, that's entirely manipulated content, and we would expect something like that to not be shared by people in authority, by information providers, and by the people who are supposed to be giving us accurate information. We expect bias, we expect misleading content, we expect false connections, particularly when we're talking in terms of electioneering. We don't expect directly manipulated or fabricated content. And this is where we're seeing something that, frankly, we're closer to the Roman Empire than we are to the 21st century, because this is far more likely to have occurred in times when we weren't able to double check and triple check. But now we're seeing it in a time when we all have access to the ability to check and to call up this information. But the problem comes with when these things are shared out and tweeted out and written about and blogged about. As we know with newspapers, the retraction doesn't matter. The retraction doesn't count. People do the retraction and they say, this is fake, this isn't true, and newspapers will apologise, but it's still teeny. that it isn't actually seen. And then we have the ubiquitous, there's no smoke without fire. And if people are prepared to believe fake news, then they will believe fake news, because it's buying into something that they want to believe and that they want to have that image for. So, why does it exist in the first place? There are really only 3 reasons why fake news exists. You'll see here we have the Bowling Green Massacre. I haven't credited this because I took this one off the screen myself. There are three main reasons, 3 primary reasons why fake news exists. To entertain. It does entertain. There is a great deal of entertainment. Someone only has to tweet something or share something about Donald Trump, and I am on it like a seagull on chips. It's so entertaining. We're all waiting for the impeachment, aren't we? We're all waiting for, it's not often that you wish someone harm, but if that man fell down the stairs, can you imagine the hits we'd get on that? Oh, there would just be just too entertaining. So there is a lot of times when lies are entertaining, particularly when they buy into our own bias. I mean, I will admit that if there's someone I don't like and something dreadful happens to them, I know there's that sense of schadenfreude, but I want to share that. And it is entertaining. So that primary thing of it being entertaining, that's the reason behind it. Some people just want to do it because it is just funny. And that's where we need to learn, separating satire from it. The scary one is this one, is to influence. That kind of unquestioning absorption of fake news creates a huge influence. And so are there Americans in the room? And does anybody like Trump? Oh, good. I just want to check, I don't want anyone stalking me out there. Or I've had my experience with trolls in the past. I don't want to bait anymore. The reason that Trump, even if there was an American, they're not going to like Trump, are they? Because we're intelligent people. Trump. I mean, this is Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne Conway. She's bent as an iron bomb. No, she can't lie straight in bed. This one. She's born lying. She was probably 3 months late because her mum was lying. So she made up a massacre. This is an accident. These aren't accidents of speaking. These aren't accidents of research. She made up a massacre that sounded plausible, the Bowling Green Massacre. It's now been said so many times that if in 5 years' time I said to people in a room like this, do you remember the Bowling Green Massacre? People go, actually, that rings a bell. Oh, I do remember. It's entirely fabricated. And it was fabricated to influence people to trust Trump's Muslim ban. This is really, and this is why we now have this, it's not really a Muslim ban apart from banning Muslims. It's that language around things. And fake news has been used enormously successfully. And we know it's been used enormously successfully because they voted for him. So that influence in intelligent people say, we all thought we can get up in the morning and be fine. No one's going to believe that nonsense. No one's going to believe those lies about walls, and no one's going to believe all that nonsense. But people did, and they did because the influence is so subtle, and the influence is there in stories that aren't fake news. So, for example, I challenged the BBC recently, and they took it down, and I was really pleased. They had a story, and it was about an art installation at Auschwitz. On the surface, nothing particularly dramatic. But the closing item, the closing sentences of the article said, according to the museum, apparently 1 million people died at Auschwitz. And I said, well, according to the museum and apparently. So according and apparently. And this is the kind of language that we see in fake news stories. And so using them in legitimate stories gives us flags, it gives us doubts of stories, and that's the kind of thing that's very important to challenge. But there is one main reason why this sort of thing exists, and that's to make money. The revenue that people are making off of fake news is absolutely colossal, like beyond that which we can imagine. There are very few people who are paid for these sorts of sites, but they are paid by advertising. And advertising revenue is staggering. I mean, you could buy out countries' national debt with advertising revenue. That is so enormous. So to demonstrate that, these are the top 5 fake political news stories on Facebook, and this is taken from last year. Now that top story, Obama signs executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide. Now, that is a classic example of where they took a little bit of information. What Obama actually did was he said, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. People were no longer legally forced to do it in all states. And doing a little bit of an Abraham Lincoln, he said, let the states decide. Like, it's actually up to the states. So, not really a story. Now, you can see that that had over 2 million shares, comments and reactions. That's direct interactions with a story. That's not just someone reading it. There was probably 10 times the number of people reading it. This was actual measurable interactions. That means that if each of those interactions had 5 or 6 adverts on the page, each of those clicks probably 10, 20 cents a click. So you can soon see that you've got 10 adverts on a page, you're probably looking at $1 a page for advertising. That's over $2 million in advertising revenue just from one story, which ran over a couple of days. In fact, the site next to it, you can actually see the site looks like ABC News. It looks legitimate, but it's got that .co at the end. So it's a completely fake site. It's not an accurate story. All the people named in the story were fake. The stories were all made up. The comments were all made up. The doctors, professors, they didn't exist. The schools that they spoke to didn't exist. The website itself is a fake site, but what they got was a couple of $1 million out of advertising revenue for a story that was completely made up. And we'll see that the other ones, so like the Denver Guardian story that's further down, FBI agent suspected in Hillary emails being found dead in apparent murder-suicide. They take an element of a story. The Denver Guardian actually never reported that. That was an entirely fake story. But you can see even that story, with an element of truth and being just believable enough, the advertising revenue on that must have been colossal. You've got nearly 500,000 interactions on a story like that. So you can see that it's pretty easy for people to be pulled into these things. And this is why it's our job to challenge fake news. It's not pedantry, it's not petty, we're not grammar Nazis. Which I've been called all of these things. Social justice warrior, that's one of my favourite. I'm going to get a shield made especially. I don't know why that's an insult. I'm quite proud of being a social justice warrior. And I'm not so happy with the phrase feminazi, but I'll take that. So I think it's important for us to challenge and question this. So why would we bother, and what's the purpose of doing it? Well, this is the IFLA poster that was put out last year, at the beginning of this year, for how to spot fake news. And it's a really good way of sharing the information, and it's something that we should all have on our walls, and it's something that we should all talk about. So things like considering the source, reading beyond, just that, if you see a story, just check out the validity of it. Quite often I'll see really good friends, really intelligent friends, share something and you think, that can't be true. That can't be true. So check on those supporting sources. Is it too outlandish? I have someone who repeatedly shares from a site called, I think it's called something like the Brighton Forum or something, and it's a joke site, it's a parody site. She's completely convinced that 2 people died in that Brighton Tower thing because they tried to jump out because they were scared. It's nonsense. It's only for the advertising. I particularly like the fact that they have asked the experts. And if people like IFLA are saying ask the experts, then we need to prepare ourselves to be asked. There is a huge appetite for this. I tweeted this poster out in January, and since then, and I have to check on a piece of paper, since then it has been retweeted over, and this was just a tweet, and this was just my tweet of it. This wasn't the IFLA's tweet of it, this is just the analytics from my tweet of it. It's been retweeted now over 600 times. I checked last night, over 600 times that's been retweeted. And it has appeared and been interacted with over 72,000 times. It's easily the most successful tweet I've ever done. I would like them all to do that, and I'd like everybody to book me for speeches and do things, pay me lots of money, that'd be great. But that it does, if nothing else, it shows that there's this appetite. There's an appetite for us to be the arbiters of truth, for us to be the ones that come up with the reliable information. If a librarian in England can tweet something like this, and all over the world people go, yes, that's what we want someone to help us with the truth, then that clearly shows that there is an appetite for it. So I think it's very important that we are all following this, and that we are all holding on to the information that actually is true, and that we are learning how to spot fake news. So one of the things that I like to do, and I apologise for being sensitive here, is I like to perform the crap test. You notice it's got an X-ray in it, so I suppose that's a crap test. And I think this is a really quick way of reminding ourselves. So with currency, when was it published? Is this something, I mean, we all share things, and quite often I've shared things that are 2-3 years out of date. So it might be true, but it doesn't have relevance now. It really doesn't have relevance now. One of the things that I tweeted recently, and I hadn't realised, it was a 2-year-old story. And you think, well, that's really, given the sensitive nature of the environment at the moment, with the political, with our snap election, we need to be sure that everything we're sharing has currency. Relevance, is the information what you're really looking for? This is something that I wish I could drum into every student's head, and in particular every journalist's head. Is that gossip story from OK magazine 3 years ago actually true? Is that the actual relevance? Is that what you're looking for to support something else? And also in relevance, who is the material looking for? Who is it written for? Is this written for academics? Is this just a gossip sheet? Is this yellow journalism, or is this research? Is this actually valid and supported data, or am I just repeating something said to someone in the Daily Mail? The authority, who published it, who wrote it? Now, this is becoming a very difficult one, because increasingly the people that we used to trust as being reliable sources of information are less so. And that is why we all need to be doing that little bit of extra research. If it's a librarian tweeting it, and I think this is the important fact, if a librarian is sharing something, I trust it. Now, I should perform all those usual checks that I would do with any bit of information, but like the general public, librarians are trusted. I trust you. We're all information professionals, and in the new international world, we expect librarians to be the font of all knowledge. I've spent a long time working with you in Franklin as well. If I want to know something, I'll ask a librarian. I think that's the important thing. So, but we need to double check. I always say that there's no such thing as double checking. Everything should be quadruple checked. If you can't find it on 4 reliable sources, it's probably not that reliable, because people are going to want to pick something up. There's a story which is going, and the bookseller's been noogling about it at the moment. An author yesterday tweeted that children are being told that they're not allowed to have certain books, because they're too hard for them, too easy for them, and that's what librarians are telling them. I have never, ever met a librarian who does that. In some very rigid and prescriptive reading schemes, they may well be children who are progressing through the scheme, and a child has been told, no, that book's too easy, I'd like you to move on and choose something harder. But this story has now become so convoluted, and I represent the Society of Authors as well, that yesterday we had the bookseller ringing the Society of Authors saying, what do you think about librarians stopping children from having books? And then we had this long rank, what do we say? But because we know that we are voices of authority, that we want to say the right thing, we don't want to damn someone, and we want to make sure that the information is right. However, there will be a number of times when they'll just run with it. We only have to look at the Carnegie debacle, which came up recently. The journalist who reported that misquoted people, took things out of context, put the story out without validating it, and it caused a huge amount of trouble and a huge amount of hurt to the people who were actually on the committee. So checking the authority is really important, not just because it leads us on to the next point, but because it protects people. And recovering from fake news, recovering from something damaging is extremely difficult. The damage is done. We're back to that no smoke without fire thing. So we need to think about the accuracy. Is it reliable? Is it accurate? If something refers to a report, find the report. Someone recently was, and the wording of it can be very dodgy. I saw someone recently, and it was a viral video of how fantastic this beautiful book for children on women, on women's history and women in history. And I've seen the book; it's a lovely book. I would heartily recommend the book. But the way they put it out was they used a report, and in the report it said, this report found that up to 100% of children's books featured a central male character. Look, up to, it's like, well, that could be like none, but up to was the way it was worded. And the report that they actually used was a report from Florida University 17 years ago, studying books that were published, 1,000 books that have been published from 1900 to, I think it was to the year 2000. You think, well, in Florida, in a university, 1,000 titles, and who picked the titles? There was so much bias, but because the way it was then said, oh, well, all children's books, they're male bias and they're sexist, and well, no, that may well be the case, but that's not actually what this report says, and it's inaccurate information, and because there was nothing else to validate it, I complained, lots of other people moaned and complained, but it's too late. It's already gone out. So we had to really push to get the accuracy of that across. And what's the purpose of the information? We all have bias. As I say, I will quickly retweet something hilariously anti-Trump. So what is the purpose? What is the bias? We don't know our unconscious biases because they are, by very definition, unconscious. So being aware of them, or trying to be aware, is going to help us. One of my favourite posters, and one that I think should be up on every public access computer, well, every computer everywhere. You probably can't see this very well. This is a poster put out by onthemedia.org. It's absolutely brilliant, and they do a number of these sorts of things. And this is the kind of thing that you would put on public library computers, work computers, your work colleagues' computers, email it to all your friends. And it gives you the ideas. So it helps things, it shows all those flags. Now, one of the things that we forget as information professionals is that we've had a long time getting a gut feeling about if something's shonky or not. A lot of people don't have that. Information is our business, so we do get a gut feeling. So I like the fact that on gut check, if a story makes you angry, it's probably designed that way. I really like that one. And I like check the date, social media resurrecting outdated stories. We were about the time for Tony Hart to die again. Every summer, poor old Tony Hart, who's been dead quite a while now, there's some wag puts a story out about Tony Hart saying, oh, R.I.P. Tony Hart, and we all go, oh, that's sad. Not forgetting that, obviously he's been dead about 8 years. And if you land on an unknown site, check its about page. Particularly if you're looking for bias, I find that the about page, you can they have to make a statement that they're joke or parody, and it's very important to look on the about side. And why does it matter? And I say, onthemedia.org, I would definitely say, get this poster and put it all on everyone's computer. It matters because it's what we do. Now, one of the things we have to deal with is we have to deal with people saying, oh, you're such a killjoy, or, you're a pedant. But if we're not doing this, then who the hell is? We're the information specialists, we're the information professionals, so we're the people who are trained to meet the needs. We're up-to-date practitioners, we're supposed to be guiding people. I always think of us, we're not guardians of this information. No librarian is a guardian of the stock, they are guides to the stock. We have to provide accurate information, and we have to facilitate literacy, learning, and development opportunities. Now, we've got the general election coming up. It has never been more important to stress that we are actually making sure that everything is factual. And I had to slip the fact matter thing in there because it is important, and it is important to make sure that we're following it. This isn't going to get any better. Fake news is not going away. In the newspaper industry, I think in America, in the last 10 years, over 100 reliable news outlets have gone. We've only got to look at in our own newspapers when we've got things like The Guardian, which is obviously hugely online. They have to sell through advertising. They have to sell their space through advertising. That comment is free is now comment is biased. And so we're seeing a lot more of this. The newspaper professional and journalism as a whole is another sector like our own that is subject to huge deprofessionalisation. So the people who are doing it, we're now seeing this huge rise in wiki journalism of people who haven't even left their house to do some research, and they sit there and they go, dig, and go, oh, that's a good story, and throw it out. I'm amazed that we don't see just chunks of Wikipedia copied and pasted. Now, there are moves for Wikipedia to be more accurate, and our own Nick Poole obviously is working hard with people to make it more accurate. But given that we have people who are doing journalism for free, even the photographs are all on mobile phones because somebody happened to be walking past, which is why we're seeing hideous photographs taken at the scene of events. And so it is up to us as information professionals to be constantly picking this and constantly picking up on fake news and making sure that it's being checked all the way through. And why does it matter? As I was saying earlier, one of my favourite things recently, which was made by this is made by my friend S.F. Said, who is a fantastic children's author, S.F. Said, and he made this because he loves librarians. And I think we should all be the credible Hulk. We need credible sources. There is a huge appetite from the public for us to do that. They have no one else to turn to. People don't know how to find this information. And things that we think, oh, that's easy, I can tell that's fake, they can't. So we have a duty of responsibility, not just to represent our profession as a whole, but to the people who need us to help them find credible sources. I particularly like these wearing glasses. I like that. With my glasses on my head. So if we don't challenge it, it will become the norm. And we can't let that happen. It's not just about eroding the work of librarians. This is actually damaging to our society. If fake news and its insidious influence is allowed to become the norm and no one stands in the way of it, then there will be no credible sources. So I'd like to leave you this evening after ranting like the Incredible Hulk, which is why I'm not quite green. I don't think any of us are green, actually, in that terms. Environmentally, possibly. Naively, not so. So what I'd like to do, the last thing I will leave you with some headlines from the days when fake news was really, really easy to spot. And I never thought I would be nostalgic for headlines like this. But I had to pick some of mine just to leave you with. Some of these that I think are particularly entertaining. As I say, once again, it took me quite a while to find a clean cover of Donkey Rob's Bank. But don't you miss the days when it was this easy to spot fake news? So don't give up when you're tired, when you're annoyed, when you're frustrated. Challenge it, complain, write about it, reshare it, but don't let fake news become fact news. Thank you very much. I'll leave you with Donkey Rob's Bank. Thank you.
So, has anyone any questions for Dawn?